What's up, Savages? As always, I'm E Middle, and this is the Savage MMA Show, the show that takes the other MMA podcasts to the deep water. Bart's unable to join us this week, so I'll be flying solo, and we got a lot to talk about. We got fights to break down from last week. Got Bellator 196 on Friday night, and we had UFC 223 with Khabib versus Ally Quinta on Saturday night. We'll break those down. We'll cover some news and talk about, of course, the notorious Conor McGregor incident. And then we'll move on and we'll do preview for Bellator 197 and UFC on Fox with Dustin Poirier finally taking on Justin Gaethje in one of the most anticipated Savage bouts of the year. So we'll jump right into things and start with Friday night's Bellator 196 headlined by Benson Henderson fighting Roger Huerta. The fight card opened up with Ed Ruth, a former All-American wrestler from Penn State, taking on Ian Pascu. And if you listened to the podcast last week, Bart and myself both overwhelmingly picked Ed Ruth. He had shown in his previous fights a strong history of striking, as he tried to prove that he wasn't just a wrestling guy, that he had other talents. And the fight Friday night really proved to be more of the same. In the first round, Ed Ruth came out and threw some good push kicks, trying to back Ian Pascu up and make distance. And he really, for the rest of the first round, just kept backing him up. He keeps his hands low, though. And it looks like Pascu has some openings for a knockout, but Pascu can't do anything with it. The second round, the same thing. He keeps pushing forward. He throws some knees, hits a big head kick that rattles Pascu, almost knocks him out. Pascu fell down at one point, and he had a strong ground and pound that almost finished him off. The third round is really more of the same. You know, Ed Ruth is a high-level competitor. He's still undefeated in MMA. He looks like he may be a guy that's pushing up the ranks in Bellator. He's moving down a weight class. From the talks of it, during his training, he's been losing weight and having trouble hitting the lower limit of the weight class. So he's been fighting up a weight class from what his weight at fight day is. So it should be interesting to see Ed Ruth drop down and fight in that lower weight class. He should be more powerful. The problem that I have with Ed Ruth so far is with his dedication to showing that he's not a wrestler, he is taking away from his strongest attribute, and that is his wrestling. And when he is wanting to stand on the feet the whole time, he's got a tendency to keep his hands low, and that really seems like could be a problem going forward. When he faces a more technical striker, he's probably going to face some real strong problems there unless he opts to take to the ground to his strong suit, which is what he probably should have been doing the whole time. The next fight is a fight we weren't real excited about. It was Brian Pac-Man Moore versus Giorgio Bellasante, an Italian, and Bart and I, neither one were very excited for this fight. It was hard to get up for it, but man, it actually delivered with a lot of action. Brian Moore, who's James Gallagher's training partner, James Gallagher was supposed to fight the undefeated Adam Borix as the headline on this card. Man, Brian Pac-Man Moore right off the front comes out, stiff right hand that drops Bellasante, he goes to the ground, starts dropping elbows on him, gets him in a guillotine, pulls him up to the feet, and ends up finishing him in a guillotine for a first-round submission. Brian Moore looked really strong. This is the best we've seen Brian Moore look, the most impressive contest that he's had. He's been real up and down to this point, but here he is with a definite move up. So after that fight, we move on to a fight between Dennis Kielholtz and Petra Kaskova. This wasn't really an exciting fight, man. It was kind of boring. Kielholtz obviously has more experience than Kaskova, and it showed in the fight. She won all 3 rounds easily, but man, what a boring fight. Killholtz is going to have to fight somebody worth of shit for for her to even be any interesting. Then we move on to the highly anticipated fight with Adam Borics versus Tedor Nikolov. Adam Borics, undefeated, fighting in Budapest. He's from Budapest. And in the first round, Adam Borics came out looking pretty strong. He trains with Michael Chandler, and that's obviously helped his takedown defenses. Nikolov is a good wrestler. Came out trying to take Borics down. Borics denied it on multiple attempts, and he just started landing on him, man. He hit a couple standing knees, a flying knee. Borics is on top at the end. I'm really surprised that Nikolov even made it out of the first round. Borics looks like an absolute fucking animal. This guy is the real deal. Comes out in the second round, and he's just still beating the shit out of Nikolov and knocks him out with an incredible flying knee that ends up winning him the Savage of the Night honors for Bellator 196. Adam Borics is our first Savage of the Night. Just an incredible performance, and most undoubtedly he'll be squaring off with James Gallagher in the next fight, and that is going to be a must-see fight. The main event of the night, Benson Henderson versus Roger Huerta. Benson Henderson just dominated Roger Huerta. There's no other way around it. Landed offense at every level. Leg kicks, head kicks, flying knee, spinning back fist, body shots, head shots. He just fucked Roger Huerta up. Fucked him up. This is the Benson Henderson that everyone has been waiting to see since he came to Bellator. When he first came over, he's 1-3 so far, and a lot of people are down on him. But like we've talked about in the previous week when we did the preview for this fight, the guys that Benson Henderson has lost to, Patricky Pitbull, these guys are the top lightweights out there. He beat Patricio in his win, who's currently the featherweight champion. But these guys, the guys he's lost to, are the absolute cream of the crop in Bellator. So look forward to seeing what Benson Henderson has. Roger Huerta's fucking done, dude. He had been losing coming into this fight. I guess he was trying to re-jump. I don't even know if he was actually signed with Bellator or if this was a last-minute signing that they had to pull off just to book something for that Budapest card. But Roger Huerta he's not very good, and that should be the end of him. So we got Adam Borics winning the Savage of the Night, and we move on to the UFC 223 card, headlined by Khabib versus Iaquinta. The first fight we'll just cover the main card. If you want to catch back with the prelims, we'll be doing a Savage deep dive coming out tomorrow like we did last week. But the main card kicks off with Chris Grismasher versus Joe Lauzon. Joe Lauzon, always a fan favorite, comes out in the first round and he's dropping bombs on Chris Grismasher. But then something changes. I'm not sure if it was poor conditioning, but it really looked like Joe Lauzon just had an adrenaline dump. And after that adrenaline dump, Grismasher is, just landing with major accuracy also. It's not that they're really bombs, but everything he's throwing is landing in the first. He does major damage in the first round. Second round, probably 10-8 round, he completely dominated it. Put it on a striking showcase. This is something we've not seen out of Grismasher before. And look forward to seeing him as he moves forwards. But the big story is that Joe Lauzon was getting his ass kicked so bad that his corner threw in the towel. His face was covered in blood. He had the crimson mask. And this is probably the end for Joe Lauzon. The guy's just taking so much damage at this point. You got to hang him up. You got to be worried about that brain damage, CTE, as he's taking so many vicious knockouts. He's getting fucked up every time he steps in the ring now. If he does win, it's in an ugly way. It's really probably time for Joe Lauzon to hang him up. But this is definitely the best we've seen out of Chris Grismasher. Look forward to seeing what he has coming on. The next fight up absolutely stole the show. We have Zabit Magomed Sharapov versus Kyle Bochniak. Sharapov gets the win. Magomed Sharapov gets the win in a split decision. I believe it's a split decision. No, it's a unanimous decision. But Jesus Christ, what a fight. Zabit, me. If you watched the live stream, you caught on to me. Me and Bart have came up with a nickname for this guy. It's the Russian Goat Spider. He is an ugly motherfucker, man. He looks like a goat fucked a spider because he has those long legs, long arms. He's a skinny fucker, and man, he is ugly. Ugly. Dagestani, one of these dudes like Khabib. But unlike Khabib, this guy is the total package, man. Threw every trick in the book. Nailed a vicious spinning back fist. Put some flying knees. Was throwing vicious leg kicks. Hitting shots to the body. Flying knees again. Landing shit in the head of Kyle Bochniak. But Kyle Bochniak was a fucking savage. This guy took the beating that Zabit had to offer and never backed down. Taunted him in the end, sticking his tongue out after, just taking on a vicious blow. Definitely the fight of the night. In my opinion, this is the current leader in the clubhouse for fight of the year honors, as this was just absolutely fucking nuts. And then Bart goes with Zabit for the Russian Goat Spider for his savage of the night. I go with Kyle Bochniak because Kyle Bochniak puts on a fucking show of just getting mauled and never backing down, and that's a savage nature. But this fucking Zabit Russian Goat Spider, man, this guy is the real deal. He's serious. Be on the lookout in the featherweight division as this guy's on the come up. Man, I don't know who he's going to fight next. I think he called out Yair Rodriguez in his post fight. But man, definitely look forward to seeing what he has next. Another featherweight fight followed up with Renato Moicano defeating Calvin Kattar in a unanimous decision. A lot of people had been riding Calvin Kattar on his hot streak. A lot of people were picking him to win this fight, but I didn't see it. I picked Moicano leading up to the fight. Moicano just delivered what was an absolute clinic as far as striking. He just landed leg kick after leg kick after leg kick, and for whatever reason, Calvin Kattar chose not to change his stance up. He kept with the same stance, and Moicano just took advantage of that fucking leg, and every time he would kick, it would kick that leg again, it would pull Kattar's hands down. Moicano just continued to eat Kattar up, and it was not a good look for Calvin Kattar. I'd like to see what Renato Moicano has as he moves up into the featherweight division as well. We move up to the next fight, and in the women's strawweight division, a much anticipated rematch between Rose Namajunas and Joanna, used to be the champion, Joy Jacek. And neither one of us picked Rose to do what she did in this fight. Leading up to the fight, definitely thought Joanna was in Thug Rose's head this time, and she was going to be able to come out on top. As we've seen Joanna just, plow through this entire division. But Thug Rose, what a performance by Thug Rose. I got to give her performance of the night for this one. Impressive, just domination of Joanna. And it's not something I saw coming. Joanna, maybe though, blaming the weight cut for the last fight, but I think the real problem here is Thug Rose's left hand is a vicious left hand, and I just don't think Joanna has an answer for it. Earlier in the night, Carolina Kowalkiewicz had an impressive victory over Felice Herrig. Kowalkiewicz has a win over Thug Rose. I'd like to see Kowalkiewicz get that title shot again, but if not, Kowalkiewicz with a rematch against her fellow Polish woman, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, would be a really interesting fight. I'd like to see that because Joanna looked like such a dominant force in the division until she was just derailed by Thug Rose, who I won't say she came out of nowhere, but she wasn't at the top of the ladder for a long time, and then she just came flying up. She's got losses, like we talked about just a second ago. She lost to Kowalkiewicz, but now she looks like an unstoppable force. So what's next here? I would definitely say Thug Rose versus Kowalkiewicz is the way to go. But I wouldn't mind at the same time seeing Joanna have a rematch with Kowalkiewicz. So we'll see what happens there. But Thug Rose is definitely the champion, undisputed. There's no more questioning if that knockout was a fluke or not. She absolutely dominated this fight and was just able to repeatedly land on Joanna, then just duck out of the way and not really take on very much damage at all. So we move on to the main event. Originally slated to be Khabib versus Tony Ferguson, and for the fourth fucking time this fight's been canceled. And we didn't really know who was going to step in here. It came down to the very last couple days. Al Iaquinta steps up and takes the fight on Max Holloway. Max Holloway takes the fight. Then, like we talked about in the last podcast, there's no... I didn't see him making that weight cut. He doesn't make it. They declare him unfit to fight. He says he could have made it, but whatever, man. I didn't want to see that fight. I thought Khabib was going to absolutely fucking maul Max Holloway. Then Iaquinta takes the fight on short notice. Props to Iaquinta for that. Especially after all the bullshit we had with Conor McGregor this week, fucking up what the original fight card was supposed to look like by taking out Michael Chiesa and Ray Borg, and his boy Artem Lobov being pulled off the card. So Al Iaquinta steps in. It's in New York. Al Iaquinta's from New York. Definitely never saw Al Iaquinta getting a title shot with all the beef he's had with the UFC. If you're not familiar with it, Al Iaquinta has been a very verbal critic of UFC's pay structure and low pay for athletes. He's talked about it in post-fight press conferences, really calling out Dana White, saying that it's a shame that he is a top-level pro athlete and he makes more money on the side as a real estate agent than he does fighting in the UFC. I assume he got a payday here because the way he's talked about UFC before, he definitely had all the power here as they had to fill this card at the last minute as Max Holloway had to duck out at the weight cuts. So I assume Al Iaquinta got a major payday here. So let's get down to the fight. He jumps in with Khabib. I don't think anybody would have picked Iaquinta to win this fight. I came out and said Friday after we found out that I'll go out on a limb and just say Iaquinta knocks out Khabib. We've seen a history of these last-minute replacement guys shocking the world and landing a knockout. Look at, for example, Michael Bisping winning the title over Luke Rockhold. But that didn't happen here. Khabib came out, dominated. Khabib won every single round. There were 2 10-8 rounds. But honestly, Khabib didn't look that good. Yeah, he dominated. Yes, he's now the undisputed lightweight champion. Can't take that away from him. But what I will say is there are holes in Khabib's game. His striking looked very subpar, very underwhelmed by his striking. Iaquinta honestly got the better of him in several exchanges. And when Khabib took Iaquinta to the ground, it wasn't like we saw with Edson Barboza. he was good and he was landing, but Iaquinta was able to avoid major damage, struggle out, and the fight went to a decision, which in itself is, in my opinion, a win for Al Iaquinta, because nobody would have even expected this fight to make it the distance. And Iaquinta does. Khabib's the champion. He calls out George St. Pierre after the fight. I don't really see that fight happening. St. Pierre doesn't have anything to come back for. If St. Pierre comes back and puts his legacy on the line, I don't think Khabib's a big enough name. Now, if Khabib, he's going to fight Conor. It's going to happen. And we'll talk about that some in the news segment. Fuck Conor McGregor. Just honestly, I don't want to see that guy fight again after that bullshit he pulled with the attack. But that fight's going to happen. Because Tony is going to be on the shelf for a while. He pulled pulled his ligament straight off the bone. So he's going to be out for a while. He's already had the surgery to repair it. He's got to fight somebody. There's nobody else. Those three guys are obviously the top of the division. We've not seen Conor in a long time. Well, not seen Conor in an octagon in a long time. But that's probably going to be the fight to make. If Khabib beats Conor, then whoever wins that fight has to fight Tony Ferguson. And then maybe whoever wins that gets George St. Pierre. But I don't know if St. Pierre has any reason to come back. The only reason he came back for that Bisping fight, let's be honest, is Bisping was an easy opponent. He was a fluke champion. His one defense was against Dan Henderson, who's way past his prime. And George St. Pierre wrecked him. There's no reason for St. Pierre to come out unless there's an easy picking like that again. So, we've covered the fights from last weekend. Before we jump into the previews for this upcoming weekend, let's cover a bit of news. And we'll start off with the obvious one. Conor McGregor and his bullshit. So, everybody knows what happened by now. I'm sure you've read the article, SavageMMAShow.wordpress.com. Bart and I both threw up an opinion piece about this thing. And I don't know if Bart was as strong as I was on this, but I don't ever want to see Conor in the octagon again. It's just despicable what he done, and it needs to be punished. He took two guys out of their fights this week. Ray Borg took glass to the eye and has corneal abrasions. That may fuck his side up permanently. McGregor arrested, charged with, I think, 3 counts of assault and criminal mischief. Michael Chiesa is going to be filing, or has already filed a suit against him. Childish behavior from Conor. And from what Michael Bisping released a statement earlier today that said Conor McGregor was set to make an announcement at this pay-per-view that he would be fighting the winner of the Khabib fight for the title. That makes me think maybe the only benefit of the doubt that I'll give Conor right now is that maybe this wasn't planned. If that was indeed what happened, it's possible that his idea was to show up and crash the press conference and make the announcement. That makes more sense than what happened. Maybe he just rolled up and he was late. They had already finished and they were on the bus, and that's what happened. But fucking stupid decision, and you got to punish the guy for this. Now, another piece of news that came from this pay-per-view, we'll jump back to the Khabib fight for a minute. If you watched the live stream, you obviously saw Bart and I chopping up Khabib's stand-up game a little bit. And apparently Joe Rogan was doing the same thing during the fight, calling it amateurish. Joe Rogan's received a ton of backlash for it. And he released a statement essentially saying, when you have a fighter as dominant as Khabib and amazing as Khabib, then his thing to do when announcing one of their fights is to look for these cracks in their game. And a major crack in his game that maybe could not be exploited by everyone, but Iaquinta showed some cracks in his game and his stand-up that definitely could be exploited by a guy like, let's say, Conor, who has extremely high-level striking, or a Tony Ferguson, who is extremely capable of dropping elbows as well. And Rogan received a lot of backlash for this, but I've got Rogan's side as watching a fight. I'd much be more interested than a guy actually trying to get technical and break down the fight more than somebody just sucking Khabib's dick for 25 minutes as this fight goes on, because nobody wants to hear that. Let's be honest. That would be a terrible watching experience. A big piece of news this week broke out with Paige Van Zandt. If you haven't noticed, she's got a book out. She's been on tour, somewhat of a book tour, stopping by all the UFC-affiliated gyms, signing copies of her book. She was on Good Morning America earlier this week, where she talked about some excerpts from the book. And something she hadn't talked about publicly before is that when she was a freshman in high school, that she was essentially gang raped at a party. Terrible story. Terrible story. This happens far too often. I can remember there was a girl that I went to school with in high school, had a similar situation where she'd gotten drunk and fell asleep, and a couple of guys took advantage of her. Just despicable, man. Men, as a class, man, as a group, we have to cut this shit out. Cut this shit out. There's no excuse for it. As barbaric as it may seem, I'm all in favor of castration. You rape somebody, you losing them nuts. And that's all there should be to it. End of story. But that just goes to show you how strong some of these women like Paige Van Zandt are, that they're able to bounce back from such a horrific thing and become the strong women that they have become. So props to all the women out there who've dealt with something like that. Big news on a fighter returning back to the octagon, as Nick Diaz has been reinstated by USADA. So Nick and Nate, as we know, like to smoke pot quite a bit. Nick Diaz not suspended for failing a drug test, suspended for missing multiple drug tests and non-reporting to USADA, but he's back in the octagon, and we can't wait to see what's coming up next out of Nick Diaz. He's always a pleasure to watch. So let's jump into some fights we've got coming up for this weekend. We've got Bellator 197 coming up with the return of Iron Michael Chandler, something that me and Bart have been looking forward to for a long time. Michael Chandler, one of my favorite fighters, a dominant fighter at the lightweight division, took the belt off Eddie Alvarez a long time ago, many title defenses, had a weird slip-up injury against Brent Primus, and we'll get into more with Brent Primus later. But let's just jump into that card right now. On the main card, we got Logan Storley versus Joaquin Buckley to kick things off. Logan Storley is a 4-time All-American wrestler going up against Joaquin Buckley, a local, also a 2-time All-American wrestler. So look for this match to go to the ground unless somebody tries to showcase those stand-up chops the way that Ed Ruth has been trying to. And speaking of Ed Ruth, him and Logan Storley have some history in the past. They met on the mat several times, and I believe Ed Ruth got the better of him. So I'm going to pick Logan Storley to win this fight over Joaquin Buckley. As a wrestler, he's superior as a striker. He also looks slightly superior And we'll look to see what happens here. It's possibly a grudge match of tops between Logan Storley and Ed Ruth possibly coming up out of this. Next fight, one that me and Bart brought up several weeks ago, is Kevin Ferguson Jr., a.k.a. Baby Slice, the son of the late, great Kimbo Slice, taking on Devin Brock. And Kevin Ferguson Jr. so far, Baby Slice, in his last couple fights, he started off 0-1 in Bellator, then he won his last two. He took his last fight by submission, and he's facing off with Devin Brock here, who is 1-0 in Bellator. I don't know if this is a good matchup for Baby Slice. It looks to be like a difficult matchup. They've thrown him on the main card here for the first time, so trying to get, and they're heavily marketing him. I've seen the commercials, I've seen advertisements on the internet. Everywhere I look, he's all over Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. He's there. So they're pushing Baby Slice. Is it too early? We'll see, but I'm going to take Baby Slice to get the win. If they're going to push him like this, I'm going to say he's ready to step in, or they wouldn't be throwing all their promotional weight behind him at this point. So that should be an interesting fight. Can't wait to watch that, as we'll see what happens with Baby Slice. The co-main event of the night, undefeated AJ McKee versus Justin Lawrence, a guy with a lot more experience. We've seen Justin Lawrence with some good striking skills. This is AJ McKee he's 12-0, looking to move up to the upper echelon, the elite levels of this division. Hasn't faced a competitor as tough as Justin Lawrence yet. And I'm going to take Justin Lawrence for the upset. There's levels to this game. You hear us say it all the time. You hear other commentators say it. There's levels to this game. And everybody's not an Adam Boric who comes flying to the top undefeated. Everyone's not George St. Pierre. Everyone is not Brian Ortega. These guys are prodigies. They're the exceptions to the rule. And more times than not, in MMA, what you see is when a guy gets up to that top level, he'll take a loss because he wasn't there yet, and he'll realize where he's at, and then he'll come back and move up into that echelon. But a lot of times a guy has to get knocked down before he can climb back up, and I think this is AJ McKee's turn to take one on the chin, and we'll pick Justin Lawrence for the upset win, as AJ McKee is favored. Last I seen minus 180, so if you're throwing some money down on the sports book, I would look for Justin Lawrence for the upset. The main event of the evening was supposed to be Michael Chandler versus Brent Primus in a title rematch. Brent Primus supposedly has an injury. Michael Chandler saying he doesn't. I've heard another commentator, I can't remember who it was, say that he thinks Primus is ducking Chandler. He's afraid to lose to Chandler because he's undefeated. Michael Chandler versus Brandon Gertz is your new main event. So Brandon Gertz had lost, I believe, 3 fights in a row. Won his last fight via first round KO. And that's the highlight they've been using on the promo packages. Brandon Gertz is explosive. He could win. He could land something on Chandler and hurt him, go for the KO, but I just don't see that happening. Just don't see it happening. Michael Chandler is such a well-rounded fighter, and he's on a mission right now. I'm going to take Michael Chandler via third round submission on Brandon Gertz. He's just used to going into these longer fights against tough top level competitors. I mean, the guy beat Eddie Alvarez, and that Bellator Eddie Alvarez that he beat is even better than the Eddie Alvarez that we see now, in my opinion. So I think Michael Chandler. We'll see what happens with Brent Primus. Michael Chandler earlier today said he doesn't think he'll fight Brent Promise, that he thinks Promise will either drop the belt or be stripped of it before the fight happens. Essentially calling him a giant pussy, but we'll see. So that's your breakdown for Bellator 197. And that's on Friday night, so look forward to watching that on Friday night. And then Saturday night we have UFC on Fox, which is an awesome card. I can't believe this is a Fox card. It's Poirier versus Gaethje's an absolute master booking. Both of these guys are savages. Somebody's going the fuck to sleep. I'll tell you who that's going to be later. We got Carlos Condit on this card. 4 fights on the main card. We'll break down the prelims on the Savage Deep Dive coming tomorrow. And we'll start with the opening fight on the main card, which is going to be seen on Fox at 8 p.m., a little earlier than you're used to. So make sure to tune into that, as Michelle Watterson, the Karate Hottie, one of the best known names in women's MMA, takes on Courtney Casey. Michelle Watterson's lost her last couple of fights. Tatisha Torres, Tiny Tornado, and Thug Rose Namajunas. No disappointment. Neither one of those losses, as both of those are top-level fighters. And then Courtney Casey's coming off a loss to Felice Little Bulldog Herring, who you'll hear us talk about in the deep dive tomorrow. Fought a hell of a fight versus Carolina Kovalkiewicz. So, no shame in either one of these girls' most recent losses. In this fight, though, I have to go with the Karate Hottie, Michelle Watterson. Her submission game is at such a high level. She won 4 straight. She had 4 straight submission wins leading up to that Rose Namajunas loss. One of which was over Paige Van Zandt. And I look for that streak to get back on track here, as Courtney Casey's a tough competitor, but I don't think she's on the level that Watterson is as one of the top women's competitors in the strawweight division. The next fight we move on to is Israel Adesanya, the last stylebender, versus Marvin the Italian Dream Vettori. Never seen Vettori fight. He's coming off a draw versus Amari Akhmadov. He has a win over Vitor Miranda, lost to Antonio Carlos Jr. Antonio Carlos Jr., the only one of those names I recognize. He lost to him. Israel Adesanya, 12-0, undefeated, very decorated kickboxer. Performance of the night at Romero versus Rockhold, UFC 221. This guy looked absolutely amazing, and there was no reason for me to pick against Israel Adesanya, the last stylebender at this point. He definitely has potential to be a future champion in middleweight. The interview was great after last fight. Said he put the whole division on notice, and he did. I'm a little surprised to see him get such a lowly regarded opponent as Marvin Vettori. We'll see if he comes out and makes another dominant statement here. He has to be in line for a jump up in the middleweight division to start making a run at it. Co-main event of the evening: Carlos Condit versus Alex Oliveira. This was set up as Carlos Condit versus the immortal Matt Brown. And what a fight that would have been. We were all looking forward to that fight. Somehow neither one of those guys those guys had never faced off against each other, given their long runs in UFC. Carlos Condit's been off for over a year. Put himself on a self-imposed suspension after that loss to Neil Magny. Said he wasn't all there, that he wasn't really invested in that fight. Before that, he lost to Lawler, Damian Maia. His last win was in 2015 over Thiago Alves. So, it's been 3 years since his last win in UFC. Alex Oliveira, also known as Cowboy, a Brazilian fighter. He had a couple wins in a row, 3-4 wins in a row, and lost to Yancy Medeiros, who went on to lose to Cowboy Cerrone. Carlos Condit has taken a lot of damage in his career, and I just don't think he's in a good spot. I'm going to be pulling for Carlos Condit in the fight. He was one of my favorite fighters to watch back in his heyday, but his heyday was a long time ago. And this sport moves people by fast. We've seen it before. And Oliveira, while he hasn't looked dominant, has looked pretty good in most of his fights. So I'm going to have to go with Alex Oliveira over Carlos Condit in this fight. And like I said, I'll be pulling for Carlos Condit. I hope he pulls it out, but I just don't think he has it in him. So we move on to the main event, and it's Dustin Poirier, Dustin the Diamond Poirier versus Justin Gaethje. If you have never seen Justin Gaethje fight, make sure to tune into this motherfucker, as he has two fights in the UFC, and they've both been Fight of the Year calibers. Versus Michael Johnson, just an absolute war where he picked up the win, and versus Eddie Alvarez, another absolute war where he ended up taking a KO. But that's Gaethje's style. He presses forward constantly. He doesn't care to get hit because he's going to land his offense, and if you knock him out, you knock him out. But he's bringing everything he's got. Dustin Poirier is an interesting fighter. He brings that style quite a bit more recently than he used to, with wins over Jim Miller and Anthony Pettis. His fight with Eddie Alvarez, much like the Gaethje fight, man, those guys were just throwing it. And that fight unfortunately ended in a no contest due to a controversial illegal knee. But Dustin Poirier, he used to wrestle a lot more than he does now, and take guys to the ground. Justin Gaethje doesn't give a fuck about going to the ground. All he cares about is standing and banging with you. 100% striking skill breakdown. Jesus. He wrestled at Arizona State, so he has wrestling skill, but he is more inclined to just stand and bang and bleed. I got to think Dustin Poirier is going to bring the same thing at him in this fight. Now, if it does go to the ground, I don't know how to say anything about Gaethje's. I've never seen the guy actually go to the ground and stay for a sustained amount of time. I'm going to guess Poirier probably has the advantage there if it goes there. And if Poirier's fighting smart, you may see him come out and do that. It's taken Poirier a long time. He has a lot of fights in the UFC. It's taken this guy a long time, and he has earned headline honors. But it's taken him a long time to get here. So I've got the feeling that instead of playing to his strengths, that Dustin Poirier is going to come out and give the fans something to watch. Because we've seen guys before, if you come out and you give the fans what they want, you're more likely to get on top than if you come out and give a Tyron Woodley-like dominant performance. Dana White is more likely to reward you for coming out and giving the fans what they want to see, as it's a business. So I look for Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje to make it to the third round, but not beyond that. And I'm going to take Dustin Poirier over Gaethje. I think Gaethje just leaves himself. He's exciting, but I think one of my favorite fighters in the UFC right now. But I think he leaves himself too many openings. Leaves too many openings for other fighters to capitalize on. And Poirier has a lot of experience. Poirier has over 20 fights, 22-5 actually. And he's fought against a lot of high-level guys. He's fought Anthony Pettis, Eddie Alvarez, Michael Johnson, Yancy Medeiros, Conor McGregor, Cub Swanson, Korean Zombie. He has a win over Max Holloway. The guy's fought a lot of high-level competitors, and I'm going to take Dustin Poirier by knockout in the third round over Justin Gaethje. So there you have it. Those are our picks. or my pick, should I say, is Bart's unable to join us this week. He'll be back as we'll be back to our normal day, dropping the Savage MMA show on Tuesday next week. Tune in tomorrow as I'll do a breakdown of the fights from the past weekend on the UFC 223 prelim card, and we'll do a look ahead to the prelims for Fight Night, Poirier versus Gaethje as well, in the Savage Deep Dive tomorrow. So we'll see you back here next week. Make sure to check out our website at savagemmashow.wordpress.com. You can subscribe to our audio podcast on Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, Double Stitch. We should be coming on Spotify this week. We'll let you guys know when we're up on there. You can also find us on YouTube. No video for this week. We're just going to do an audio version. It'll be on YouTube also, though. And you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Savage MMA Show. You can follow me on Instagram at Savage_E_middle. So, we'll see you guys back when Bart joins us next week. I'll catch you on the Savage Deep Dive tomorrow. And until then, stay savage, motherfuckers.